Billy blues, surf, roots, early country, early rock and roll, and Ameripolitan music. This is the Rockabilly and Blues Radio Hour. Now, we just heard Duane Eddy's 3:30 Blues. It's from his debut album, Have Twangy Guitar Will Travel. We also heard a snippet of an intro that Don Everly would give Duane Eddy each night when the Everly Brothers and Duane were touring together in the early 90s. Now, for additional interview footage with Duane Eddy talking about producing Phil Everly and his friendship with both brothers. It's available on our website, rockabillyandblues.com. It's rockabilly, the letter N, blues.com. Some great stuff we just didn't have room to squeeze in here, but we wanted you to hear it. Now, this is part one of our interview with our guest and Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, Duane Eddy.
In 86, part of a Grammy for Best Rock Instrumental with Art of Noise, revisiting Peter Gunn. What was that like?
That was interesting because they were kind of cutting edge at the time, very avant-garde. And as JJ, one of the guys in the group, said, he said, yeah, they keep saying we're avant-garde. He says, I guess it means we avant-garde the faintest idea what we're doing. A friend of mine was sitting with their label head, and he was complaining that he couldn't get them in mainstream. You know, he says they're doing great in the dance market, the Art of Noise, but mainstream-wise, they're not doing anything. I need to put them with somebody, and they went on with their conversation, and my friend said, well, he says, guess who I talked to yesterday? I talked to Duane Eddy. And the label head said, snapped his fingers, said, that's it. My friend said, that's what? He said, that's who I could put with the Art of Noise. Oh. And my friend says, well, I can call him. And the guy says, but what could they do? And my friend was frantic, trying to think of something because he really wanted to make it happen, you know. He said, what was the first thing popped in his mind? What about Peter Gunn? And the guy said, great idea. So they made an arrangement, and I flew over with my guitar and put my guitar on the track, and the thing came out and was a hit all over the world, except in Middle America where the company, Chrysalis, had their promotion men and all that busted for cocaine and hookers and payola and all that stuff. The FBI was on them, so they just shut them down. But it was number one up and down the West Coast and East Coast where they still had their promotion people. Anyway, it only got to number 50 in this country, but it was number one in almost every other country in the world. And it was fun. It was fun doing. It was interesting. They didn't like performing. They were. Ann Dudley was. She won an Academy Award for Full Monty. She did the music for that. She did the Crying Game too, but I don't think she won an award. She did win an Academy Award for the Full Monty, doing the music. And she arranged and produced Kenny Rogers in Paris. And, she did a lot of different things musically. She was really a great keyboard player and great arranger and composer. Very talented lady.
referenced the Beatles earlier. Paul and George were on a great album you did in '87 on Capitol, self-titled. Also had John Fogerty, Ry Cooder, and others. What was going on around that time period?
Well, when I was, the record was being a hit all over the world, the Peter Gunn record with the Art of Noise, we went to Switzerland and did the rock festival in Switzerland. While I was there, I ran into a bunch of artists, but one of them was Jeff Lynne. He came up, he says, Duane, I know you're going to get a deal out of this record, this hit single. He said, I just want you to know I'll do whatever you'd like me to do. I'll play, write with you, produce something, anything, co-write. He said, I'd just like to be a part of it or do a track or two. And he says, because I know you're going to have a deal. And I said, so he gave me his numbers and everything. So I said, okay, I'll call you. I didn't think anything was going to happen that much, but sure enough, a couple of months later, I got a deal with Capitol Records. And I went on tour with Huey Lewis and the News around America and opened for them. And, it was getting a little more high profile through all this, and Capitol wanted to do an album with me, so I signed with them to do the album and did the first 2 tracks with the Art of Noise here in Nashville. They were on their way from L.A. to New York, and we diverted them here for a couple of days, did a couple of tracks, and then I just started. They gave me a great budget, and I just started putting things together, and I called Jeff Lynne, and I said, well, Jeff, you were right. I got my deal. And he said, I knew you would. And I said, would you like to do something? He says, well, I'd love to. He said, but I can't. I says, just didn't say anything. He says, and the reason I can't, he says, is I'm working with George Harrison. He says, I'm producing his album, which turned out to be Cloud 9. He says, I'm working with him on that, so I just can't do it. And I said, oh, I understand. That's fine. No problem. I had no idea what I would have done with him anyway, So, and I said, but thanks for, I said, I was glad you turned out to be right. And he said, okay, so we said our goodbyes and everything. I said, tell George hello for me. And about 20 minutes later, the phone rang, and it was Jeff. He says, well, I told George who it was that had called me and what you'd wanted, and he wants to put his album on hold and do yours. And when can you come over? I said, how about next week? He said, that's perfect. Need and I flew to London and went up to George's place and cut 3 tracks up there. And one of them was a little melody that Ravi Shankar had taught George. And it had a weird note in it, And he said, it's the weirdest, it's the greatest note I ever heard. Because it was an odd note. It just didn't belong there, but it worked, So he says, if you can finish that up. So I finished up the song. So I co-wrote a song with Ravi Shankar. and without ever meeting or seeing him, just through by George. And so we cut that. Jeff came up with an idea, and I wrote the bridge. And then we had a Rockabilly thing that we just threw together, and which George came up with the title, which I thought was hilarious. He called it Rockabilly Holiday. Only the British could think of putting Billie Holiday and Rockabilly together. Yeah. Still cracks me up when I think about it.
You've been listening to the Rockabilly and Blues Radio Hour. Much more from Duane Eddy next time. Now, to take us out from his self-titled album in 1987 on Capitol Records, this is Rockabilly Holiday, produced by Jeff Lynne, and a title suggested by his friend George Harrison, who also played on the album. Now, we'll hear one of the tunes George played slide guitar on next time, along with stories about Rebel Rouser appearing in Forrest Gump, being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and so much more. Until then, it's Jam and James Riley saying, keep on rockin'.